It was the start of summer when my uncle, Armin, called with a plan. His voice, warm and familiar, always brought comfort. He was my mother's older brother, a man of soft-spoken wisdom and unmatched charm, someone I admired deeply. Ever since I was little, he had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary. "Let's get away for a while," he said. "Just us, a quiet spot by the river. No noise, no distractions. You need a break." He wasn't wrong. Life had grown heavy lately. School stress, distant friends, and a deepening sense of isolation. The thought of escaping, even for a day, felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long. I packed lightly, a few snacks, a worn-out hoodie, and my notebook. We met early the next morning. Armin greeted me with his usual half-smile and a bag full of sandwiches and old camping gear. The drive was calm, the road winding through tall trees and scattered patches of sunlight. We barely spoke, but the silence was comfortable. Occasionally, he pointed out memories. "I used to ride my bike here," or "Your mom once got lost on this very road." Each comment was a thread, weaving our shared past into the present. When we arrived at the picnic spot, it was more beautiful than I imagined. A wide meadow opened up near a slow-moving river. Birds danced overhead, and the air smelled of pine and wildflowers. We laid out a blanket and unpacked lunch. For hours, we talked about books, travel, life. Armin was always curious. He asked questions that made me reflect deeper than I usually dared. As the sun lowered, turning gold and casting long shadows, he pulled out an old flask. "Just a sip," he winked, offering it to me. I refused gently, laughing it off. He didn't push. Instead, he leaned back, watching the sky. "Sometimes," he said, "I miss being young, being seen." I didn't know what to say to that. I just smiled and nodded, trying not to read too much into it. Maybe he was just reminiscing. The day had been lighthearted, even joyful. I didn't want to taint it with suspicion. Night approached faster than expected. The wind turned cool, and we started a small fire. The flames flickered against his face as he told a story about getting lost in the mountains during his 20s. His voice was low, almost hypnotic. The way he spoke made everything sound meaningful, even the quiet between sentences. Eventually, I rested my head against a nearby log, staring at the stars as they emerged one by one. It was peaceful, almost perfect. And yet, in the back of my mind, something subtle stirred, an unease I couldn't quite name, a whisper, a shift in the air. Still, I dismissed it. After all, I was with someone I trusted, someone who had always been there. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows that danced across the grass. The sky above was a canvas of stars, vast and unbroken. I sat closer to the flames now, hugging my knees, grateful for the warmth as the temperature dropped. Uncle Armin sat across from me, his face illuminated by firelight, his eyes reflecting something I couldn't quite place, an emotion too complex, too unfamiliar. He had grown quieter since sunset. The earlier lightness in his voice was gone, replaced by a thoughtful silence. Occasionally, he sipped from his flask, not enough to seem drunk, but just enough to deepen the weight of his words when he finally spoke. "You've grown so much," he said suddenly, his voice gentle. "It's strange, watching someone change right before your eyes." I smiled politely, unsure how to respond. "I guess that's what growing up is." "Yes," he said, more to himself than to me. "But it makes you realize how fast time slips by. One day you're chasing fireflies, and the next, everything feels like a memory." He leaned back on his elbows, staring into the sky. There was something in his tone, a kind of yearning. Not romantic, not clear, just emotionally raw. I didn't know whether to feel touched or unsettled. He began telling a story from his 20s, about a woman he once loved deeply. "She was bright, full of fire," he said. "But I never really understood her until it was too late." He paused, then looked at me with a faint smile. "Sometimes I think people like that come into our lives to remind us of what we've lost." I shifted uncomfortably, unsure where the conversation was heading. My heart began to race, though I couldn't explain why. He wasn't saying anything overtly wrong, but the emotional intensity in his voice, the way his gaze lingered, began to blur the boundary between familial and something else. When I stood to stretch, hoping to break the atmosphere, he reached out and gently touched my wrist. Just for a moment, just enough for my breath to catch. "I'm sorry," he said, quickly withdrawing his hand. "I forget how sensitive things can be." I laughed nervously. "It's okay," I said, though it didn't feel okay. Something had changed, something subtle but undeniable. I sat back down, this time further away. He didn't comment. Instead, he resumed staring into the fire, his features calm but unreadable. Silence settled between us like fog, the kind that obscures, not soothes. Eventually, he stood and walked to the tent, zipping it closed behind him. I remained by the fire, wide-eyed and restless, the warmth no longer comforting. That night, sleep came in fragments. Every creak of the woods, every whisper of wind made me flinch. I kept glancing toward the tent, my mind chasing shadows that wouldn't settle. Something inside me knew this night wasn't over. The woods had grown quiet, almost unnaturally so. I lay on my side near the fire, the embers fading but still glowing dimly. My hoodie barely shielded me from the chill, yet it was the unease in my chest that kept me awake. Every sound, the rustling leaves, the crack of distant twigs, felt amplified in the silence. My eyes darted between the dark trees and the tent, where Uncle Armin had disappeared earlier. I told myself I was imagining things, that the awkwardness, the lingering glances, the weight behind his words were nothing more than my mind overanalyzing a tired man's nostalgia. But the thought refused to leave me. It hung like fog around my thoughts, heavy and unclear. Just when I began to drift into shallow sleep, I heard the tent unzip. My heart stilled. Armin stepped out slowly, almost silently, as if trying not to wake me. But I was already wide awake, still as stone, pretending to sleep. I felt him sit beside me. His breath was uneven, and I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down like a second blanket. When he gently placed his hand on my shoulder, I froze. "Hey," he whispered. "Are you cold?" I didn't answer. I wanted to pretend I was still asleep, that this was all in my imagination. But then his hand moved. Not violently, not quickly, but with intent. The kind that speaks louder than words. Panic surged through me. I sat up instantly, heart pounding, and pulled away from him. "What are you doing?" I asked, louder than I meant to. My voice cracked with fear, my breath shallow. His eyes widened like he hadn't expected me to react. I was just checking on you," he stammered. "You looked cold. I didn't mean—" "No," I said sharply, backing away. "Don't." The fire, barely alive, cast an eerie glow across his face. For the first time, I didn't recognize him. The man I had trusted, admired, even loved in that uncomplicated way we love family, had become someone else. He didn't follow me as I stood and walked a few feet away. I sat under a tall tree, hugging my knees to my chest, shaking, not just from the cold, but from a betrayal too sharp to put into words. For a long while, neither of us spoke. He remained by the fire, head bowed, silent. I could feel the fracture between us widening with every second. Eventually, the fire died completely, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My thoughts spiraled. Was it my fault? Did I misread everything until now? No. I had done nothing wrong. Something in him had shifted, something I hadn't seen coming. And now, nothing between us would ever be the same. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon, casting pale light through the trees. I hadn't slept. My eyes were red and heavy, but my mind remained alert, wound tight by the events of the night. The forest that had seemed peaceful the day before now felt like a trap. The air was colder, the sounds sharper, the birdsong eerily out of place. Uncle Armin emerged from his sleeping bag shortly after sunrise. He looked exhausted, like a man who had aged years overnight. He didn't look at me at first. Instead, he busied himself with the fire, struggling to relight it. The silence between us was louder than any words. "I made a mistake," he finally said, not looking up. His voice was low, brittle. I didn't respond. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't shatter me further. He glanced in my direction, his eyes filled with shame. I wasn't thinking clearly. I let my emotions. I crossed a line. I know I did. Still, I remained quiet. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed space. Space to process, to breathe, to protect the trust that had been so thoroughly broken. "I never wanted to hurt you," he continued, his hands shaking slightly as he poured water into a kettle. "You're like a daughter to me. I don't know what came over me." "That's not enough," I said at last. My voice was soft, but firm. "You don't just forget boundaries. You don't forget family." He closed his eyes as if my words physically stung. "You're right," he whispered. "I deserve that." The picnic no longer mattered. The beauty of the river, the warmth of the fire, all of it was overshadowed now. I stood and began packing my things, my movements slow but decisive. "I'm calling Mom when we get back," I told him, not as a threat, but as a promise. "This can't stay secret." "I understand," he said quietly. "And I won't stop you." We drove back in silence. The same road that once felt comforting now stretched like an endless corridor of discomfort. I stared out the window, replaying everything: his words, his hand on my shoulder, my scream. The sense of betrayal ran deep, but deeper still was the grief of losing someone I thought I knew. Back home, I stood in my driveway as he parked. I didn't wait for a goodbye. I walked inside and closed the door behind me. Later that day, I told my mother everything. She listened with disbelief at first, then sorrow. Tears filled her eyes, not just for me, but for the brother she thought she knew. Healing would take time. The scar wouldn't vanish, but I had spoken my truth. And in doing so, I had reclaimed my voice. What he broke that night was trust, but what I found in the aftermath was strength I hadn't known I possessed.